Assalamu alaikum and welcome to The Report. We're back after our hiatus over Ramadan. Thank you for joining us tonight. I'm Yasmin Khatoon. As usual, we'll be taking a look at news stories from around the globe. Since July 8th, Israel has continued in its military operation in Gaza, killing almost 1,500 civilians. So a 72-hour truce brokered by the United Nations and the US crumbled today. Here's your news roundup. The Israeli military has resumed operations in Gaza as a 72-hour humanitarian ceasefire brokered by the US and United Nations crumbles. At least 5 Palestinians have been killed as a result of Israeli tank shelling during the ceasefire period. Local reports also indicate airstrikes and sniper fire had taken place. 14 Palestinians were killed as Israeli flares continued to pound Gaza City throughout the night. 25 days on from the start of the operation, almost 1,500 Palestinian lives have been lost, with 3 Israeli civilians killed. Israeli forces remain on the ground in Gaza. Over the weekend, Israeli and Palestinian negotiators will be heading to Cairo for separate negotiations. The Palestinian delegation will be comprised of Hamas, Fatah, and a number of smaller factions. Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas will not be heading to Cairo. As the crisis in Gaza continues unabated, United Nations Under-Secretary-General for Humanitarian Affairs Valerie Amos has urged parties to protect civilians from the conflict. More than 80% of those killed have been civilians, including nearly 251 children. The United Nations estimates that up to 440,000 people in Gaza have been displaced. Israel launched its offensive in Gaza on July 8th in response to what it has called a surge of cross-border rocket attacks. The government-appointed head of China's largest mosque has been murdered after conducting morning prayers. State media reported that the Uyghur imam of the 600-year-old Idkah Mosque in the city of Kashgar was killed in the early hours yesterday. Police have shot dead 2 of the alleged assailants while capturing another. The death comes days after fighting in the region intensified between rebel Muslim Uyghurs and government forces. The imam was a controversial figure among Uyghurs in the region, backing the government in 2009 after riots in the capital Urumqi, in which 200 people were killed. Tensions among the Uyghur are running high after officials in Xinjiang forced Muslims to ignore religious customs during the holy month of Ramadan. The US Peace Corps has pulled volunteers from Liberia, Sierra Leone and Guinea as the Ebola virus spreads. The virus has killed 729 people in the 3 countries since February. The World Health Organization has said the number of Ebola cases has topped 1,300. The outbreak of the hemorrhage fever, for which there is no known cure, began in the forests of East Guinea in February. Sierra Leone now has the highest number of cases. The jump in the number of cases and the death toll has raised international concern and placed poor health facilities in the region under strain.
Already we had a very inadequate health workforce, and we don't have enough specialists in country as far as medical doctors and even specialist nurses are concerned. And so with this outbreak that require so much specialty, it's even more challenging for us. And it has been very, very difficult on our health workers because they've lost a lot of their colleagues in the process and their morale is down.
A £59 million response plan from the World Health Organization was launched today.
We talk about around $100 million being needed to fund this response plan. The plan includes, identifies a whole range of medical personnel required to help support the response to the outbreak. This includes doctors, nurses, logisticians, epidemiologists, etc., communications experts, social mobilisation experts to talk with members of the community to get the messages out about what to do, about to present at health facilities, about to ensure that they get there early for treatment.
A Greek court has acquitted 2 men accused of shooting migrant farm workers who were demanding unpaid wages. The court gave 2 foremen suspended sentences in a ruling that prompted outrage from unions and rights groups yesterday. 28 migrants, mostly Bangladeshi, were wounded when foremen at the strawberry farm opened fire on about 200 immigrant workers. The workers were protesting for back pay in the southwestern town of Manaloza in April last year. Just days after the shooting, the incident sparked a demonstration outside the Ministry of Public Order and Citizen Protection in the Greek capital. Members of the Communist Party, various workers' union and immigrants gathered criticising the government for turning a blind eye, both to racist acts and not doing enough to protect immigrant workers.
Πρέπει όμως να πάψουμε, να κλείνουμε τα μάτια, να πάψουμε οι ίδιοι να δείχνουμε ανοχή απέναντι σε αυτά. Και όταν λέω ανοχή, εννοώ να μην απαντούμε οργανωμένα σε αυτό το σχέδιο, σε αυτή την αντεργατική πολιτική, γιατί διαφορετικά αυτά θα ενταθούν και βεβαίως δεν θα έχουν ως απέναντι ως στόχο τους μετανάστες, θα έχουν και τους Έλληνες και τους μετανάστες, γενικότερα την εργατική τάξη.
Lawyer Moses Karabidis, who represented 35 migrant workers, including the wounded, called Thursday's ruling shameful. The court in the southern city of Patras acquitted the farm owner and supervisor, handing down prison terms of 7 and 14 years for the two foremen on charges of causing grievous bodily harm. The sentences will be suspended pending an appeal hearing. The ruling in favour of the owner and supervisor cannot be appealed. Anti-immigrant sentiment has surged in recent years in Greece, where a 6-year recession has wiped out a quarter of the economy and left 1 in 4 jobless. That was your news roundup there. With me in the studio now are Abe Hayeem, founder of Architects and Planners for Justice in Palestine, and Tony Laurence, CEO of Medical Aid for Palestinians. And joining me on Skype from Gaza is Hatem Shurrab, Islamic Relief spokesperson in Gaza. OK, if we go to Hatem first. Are you there, Hatem? Can you hear us?
Yes, assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam. Wa alaikum salam. Jazakallah khair for joining us from Gaza. Can you tell us what's been happening today? Now, we heard of a ceasefire, which was meant to last 72 hours. It broke down in the early hours of today. We've heard about fatalities right through the morning. Can you tell us what's happening?
Yeah, in the early morning, it was very heavy shelling happening in all over Gaza Strip. And at 8, a ceasefire started and bombs stopped. And we felt there is some, it will be going very well. But after 4 hours of some quiet time, we returned back to bombing. But this time was very heavy, especially in Rafah. And during that time, in the 4 hours which it was quiet, we went out to, families went out regularly to buy goods, to buy stuff for themselves. We as Islamic Relief, we went to the ground, we went to some places which we can't access during the fighting, but it was really, what we saw was really very difficult to describe, a lot of destruction and damage. And after that, when the bombing returned, there is a lot of tension in Gaza. The people returned back to their homes. Just a couple of hours ago, a Shifa hospital was threatened to be bombed, and that was through the Red Cross. They were told that a Shifa hospital will be bombed at any moment today, and this is something scary for the people. Like, to have hospitals being targeted is something really horrific for the people. Also in Rafah, there was a hospital that was targeted, and it couldn't receive the so many casualties which were in Rafah today due to the very intensive fighting.
Hatem, can you tell me the condition of Shifa Hospital right now? We know there are many people currently in that hospital. How many people are there, and are they receiving the supplies that they need?
The situation of the health sector in general, and especially at Shifa Hospital as a main hospital in Gaza, is already deteriorated before this crisis. And now imagine when at one time, in one hit, the hospital receives hundreds of people at one time. In like a few minutes, hundreds of injured and killed people arrived to the hospital. I remember I saw injured people on the ground being treated on the floor of the hospital because of the shortage of beds. Also, doctors tell us every day there is a lot of shortage because of the intensive and the so many injuries that are coming. Even what they already have in store and their storage is not enough. It is consumed very quickly. We at Islamic Relief deliver daily for the hospitals, medicine, equipment, and especially urgent things they want, but they are consumed in a very short time because of the huge number of injured people that arrive every day. So the health sector is already suffering, and it is suffering more now. When having hospitals being targeted is also another problem that will complicate the situation. The hospitals now are hosting also internally displaced people, so it's not only a place for wounded, but it's also for people who have lost or who had their homes destroyed and evacuated their homes from, especially from border areas. So it is very complicated here, especially in the health sector.
Thank you so much, Hatem. We will come back to you. We'll try to come back to you later on in the programme. I just want to go to our guests in the studio now. Tony, we just heard many things there. The Shifa hospital is supposedly being targeted, possibly maybe under fire later on tonight. This is what Hatem's telling us from the ground. So what does this mean for some of the aid work that's taking place there on the ground and the people who are in these hospitals?
Well, it's a clear breach of international law. Hospitals, medical facilities, medical personnel are protected under the Geneva Conventions. But not only that, you heard the hospitals were in a very problematic, difficult state before all this started. We now have a health disaster on our hands. They can't cope with this level of casualties. As you just heard, there are displaced people taking shelter in the hospitals. They're unable to discharge the patients that they've treated because there's nowhere to send them. There are too many displaced people. There's no one to look after them at home. Other hospitals have been damaged. And there are acute shortages of supplies, which Medical Aid for Palestinians, Islamic Relief and others are trying to address, and we are getting things in, but it's not enough to meet the level of need that we have at the moment.
Now, the 72-hour ceasefire was a humanitarian ceasefire, which was to enable these goods to come in. Were you hopeful in the ceasefire lasting? I know it didn't last very long, but were you hopeful?
I was a bit more hopeful this time because it seemed to have more force behind it, if you like. The various, from the Secretary of State Kerry and the UN Secretary General and so on, and both sides apparently signing up to it and agreeing to go to Egypt for talks. So you felt there was some greater opportunity of this turning into a more stable ceasefire, which is desperately needed. So horribly disappointing. I was just talking to one of our staff in Gaza who was about to go out and visit their family when she reported that the ceasefire had broken down, so they were all stuck again, unable to move.
Abe, I want to bring you in here. The Washington Post are saying by late Friday morning, Israel was heavily bombarding areas in southern Gaza, especially the border town near Rafah. Now, if we've seen this bombardment come in so quickly, did either side feel as though they were going to try to keep this ceasefire? We saw aircraft in the sky very, very quickly.
Well, I mean, there was no way that Israel was going to stop trying to target the tunnels, on the pretense of trying to get rid of the tunnels. It has actually created the most terrible devastation of whole areas, neighborhoods flattened. So it must have gone beyond what Israel was supposed to be intending. Well, what we have here now is the Dahir Doctrine, which is what the Israeli army policy was, which is to reduce the whole of Gaza into a sort of a devastated landscape, destroying all the facilities, the power stations, the hospital. I mean, to target hospitals, is a war crime. The whole thing is a war crime of unprecedented proportions. So this was actually a pre-planned operation where Israel actually provoked Hamas with killings, well before the rocket started. And so this is a really a deliberately intended operation, which Israel now is going to finish Gaza completely.
Okay, you're talking about the infrastructure of Gaza there. Now, in terms of this operation and what is taking place and the impact it's having on the landscape of Gaza, is there any hope that things can return back to normality?
Well, it's going to take years. You know, it's like the blitzkrieg of Dresden and Berlin in the Second World War. It's of that sort of proportion. And for an area that was actually in a terrible state, you know, through a 7-year siege, you know, with supplies being prevented, a total blockade from land, sea, and air. So it was already in a disaster situation even before this whole operation began. So it's going to take years, if not generations. And what we have here is not only the devastation, it's the use of the most terrible, you know, sophisticated weaponry, weapons that have never been used before are being tested out, which are going to create terrible medical problems, cancer, the use of dime, bullets, you know, that shatter and devastate, you know, the whole body. You know, it is a frightening scenario.
Tony, can I bring you in here? Now, we've heard frightening scenarios, devastating weapons. One of the most horrific scenes I saw was a 6-month baby with shrapnel in its back. What have your team been saying on the ground there, and how much more difficult does it make it to get workers and to help these civilians on the ground when we've seen so much landscape devastation?
Well, I think something needs to be done about that. At the moment, the medical doctors and nurses are exhausted. Their attention is wholly focused on saving lives. But there's a lot more that needs to be done with these severe injuries of children and patients generally. And I think there are other things that can be done. We have to look for the possibilities here. I think much more needs to be done to get patients with serious injuries out of Gaza. That's what happened in 2008-9. A lot went out through Rafah and were treated in various countries in Egypt and beyond. And quite a lot went out through Israel to East Jerusalem, to the West Bank, to Jordan, and so forth. And I think that's not taking place. It's not, a little bit is taking place, but I see no reason why that can't be stepped up. Obviously there are problems with it, but you know, it can happen. And if the international community worked with the relevant authorities, I think it would be possible to get many more patients out. You can also, at least when there's a ceasefire, you can get specialist doctors in, and that's something certainly that we are working on doing, getting you know, surgeons who are expert in reconstructive surgery, post-traumatic injuries, in there to begin to repair some of the terrible wounds and damage to these severely injured patients.
Okay, very briefly, we are seeing negotiations supposedly taking place over the weekend where Hamas and Fatah are sending negotiators as well as the Israeli government to Egypt. What can we expect from these negotiations, very briefly, from the both of you, Tony?
I think it's very hard to know what we can expect. I mean, I think both sides are so entrenched at the moment. It's difficult to know what is now going to hold them back and to agree to finally sit round a table and come to some at least an agreement on a ceasefire, but that's obviously what you have to focus on. But I think the most, beyond that, what we have to press for is not just a return to the status quo. There's got to be a new deal for Gaza in which there is massive investment, creation, not only in the infrastructure, but some opportunities for a better standard of life.
Abe?
Yes, I mean, what Hamas is asking for, which is so reasonable, is the lifting of the blockade so that people can live normal lives. And I think it is really reprehensible of the big powers, the United States backing what Israel is doing and then pretending, oh yes, you know, too many civilians are getting killed, and yet supplying Israel with billions of arms. You know, they're running short of mortar shells, so America supplies, you know, another supply of shells to kill more people. It's the big powers that are not emphasizing and telling Israel enough is enough. We're going to stop arming you. The billions of arms that go into from both America and Britain, they have got to tell Israel, stop it now. There must be a Security Council resolution that America doesn't continue vetoing. You know, the whole thing is absolutely appalling. The time wasting in these negotiations at Cairo and you know, the more time that's lost, the more people that are going to be killed and the more devastation, you know, that's going to go on. So it's got to be a firm hand on Israel to say enough is enough. Now you better stop it. And, you know, the blockade must be lifted immediately.
Thank you all so much for your contributions. We will try to come back, but we have a home story now. It was revealed this week that HSBC Bank had issued notices informing Finsbury Park Mosque, Ummah Welfare Trust and activist Anas Altikriti's family to terminate their personal and business accounts. No proper explanation was given to any of those parties. Here's Afzal Ahmed with more on this story.
It's a surprise that many of us wouldn't like to happen, but it's a catastrophe when you're a prominent masjid, a respected charity and a well-known Islamic activist. Revealed this week, HSBC Bank has issued notices to Finsbury Park Mosque, Ummah Welfare Trust and to prominent activist Anas Altikriti's family and business accounts. They have all been informed that their accounts will be permanently terminated. The bank said that to continue to provide services for them would be outside the bank's risk appetite. No other reason has been forthcoming. Risk appetite is the amount and type of risk that an organization is prepared to pursue, retain or take. All affected parties have hit out at the bank and bewildered at the lack of clarity in the matter. They have accused the bank of closing their accounts due to the links to Palestine. Mohammed Ahmed of Ummah Welfare Trust particularly is shocked that this has happened while a war on Gaza is taking place.
Why would a bank, which is the size of HSBC, a global bank, a massive corporation, which has different wings, including its media team, why would they want to choose to make a business decision in the middle of a war when people are dying and we are providing aid?
The Finsbury Park Mosque regularly hosts community activities and open days and is seen as a pillar for the local community.
We wanted the HSBC to actually come up with the reasons for us in order to see if we could actually have our own explanation to it. But in reality, it seems to be the only explanation for it now, as absolutely no reason was given. We think it's an Islamophobic attack against Muslim charities, British Muslim charities in the UK, and we are determined to really hold the HSBC to be ashamed of why they would take part in an Islamophobia or have an Islamophobia policy or an Islamophobic campaign against the Muslim community.
Last time in 2010, it took about 2 months.
CEO of the Cordoba Foundation, Anas Altikriti, has been hit the hardest, with both his family's and business accounts being targeted. This includes the account of his 12-year-old son. HSBC in recent years has been cutting back and terminating the accounts of individuals and businesses it deems risky. In August last year, HSBC terminated the accounts of Vatican's representative in Britain, and in the same month they terminated the accounts of 40 embassies, consulates and high commissions. Other banks have followed suit, targeting other Islamic organizations such as Cage, Hugs and Interpol. Muslim groups have accused the banks of engaging in a campaign in targeting Muslim organizations key to the community, fearing the growth of what they deem political Islam. Ummah Welfare Trust and Altikriti have called for a boycott of HSBC, with Finsbury Park Mosque planning to demonstrate outside the local HSBC bank. With no clarification of such being made on this matter and banks refusing to disclose details, those left in the dark are being forced to come to their own conclusions, which make sense. Afzal Ahmed, The Report, Islam Channel.
We will be following the story with HSBC Bank and the different parties concerned, but unfortunately that is all we've got time for this evening. I want to thank all of my guests and those who have contributed to this programme, Abe Hayeem, Tony Laurence and Hatem Shurrab in Gaza for joining us. And of course, you at home for watching. Remember to keep up with the Twitter conversation using #TheReport. We will be following your stories throughout the week, so do keep tweeting. If you prefer, you can email us your thoughts on the report at islamchannel.tv. To watch some of our previous programmes, do go onto our YouTube channel at /Islam Channel TV. We'll leave you some scenes from Eid al-Fitr prayers from around the world, where a day of celebration has become somewhat somber this year as a result of ongoing war in Gaza. Join us for your report next Friday, but until then, from all of us here, Assalamu alaikum.